Looking at a solution to the coffee shop national chain context, we look at the entire marketplace, the ecology in which coffee shops exist, and all the things going on there. So basically we have the coffee shops themselves, the societal systems. Within those we have the employees, the organizing systems that will do the work, and within those the various stations that they work at in order to satisfy their needs and produce their goods. Within the ecological marketplace, we have vendors of the materials and services and coffees and foods that we're going to be offering, as well as the populations of people who might come to a coffee shop, which isn't everyone that lives in the area, but everyone who would use a coffee shop, and within that population, individual customers. So we want to design a system that will serve these needs. Recall, this is a solution to a 1-hour quiz, so we're not looking to be exhaustive and go into every detail on what goes on in the process. We are expecting to model sufficiently to know what the basic scope of the system would be. So we're looking not at a definitive model of coffee shops, but at a 1-hour solution, that which we can model in 1 hour. So we won't go into lots and lots of detail because you can't do that in 1 hour. We typically won't label the diagrams either if the labeling would slow us down in our modeling, and the labeling would have been the perfunctory labeling anyway, new things in, new old things out, that kind of stuff. So if you're including this kind of model and you've got multiple flows in or out of something, you'll need to label them so that we know the difference, but otherwise we'll presume that inbound flows are putting new things into our stocks, outbound flows are taking things out of our stocks, and we're not going to worry about the terminology during a 1-hour analysis. If we expanded this to a 3-hour exam or a longer project, we would certainly want to start labeling all of those and understanding those terms. But under the umbrella that everything we do is more important than what we don't do, given the speed at which we're expected to model on a quiz like this, we don't tend to label a lot of things. But if there's time, you want to write a lot of text around the diagrams that you include. So most of what I'm saying here in the video would be text if I were writing this up as a document. Okay, so one way to visualize your system when you're analyzing it quickly is develop in your mind a picture of what the process is going on. So a big mistake people make on this quiz is they think of a coffee shop as only producing beverages, hot coffee. So instead, think of something like a multi-item order. I go in the morning and get my hot coffee, my donut, and my newspaper. So that's the kind of customer you want to be thinking about as you model your system. A system concept diagram is helpful to understand what's going on with flow. Most stores, most shops, most retail establishments of any kind are ultimately about connecting vendors with customers. So how do customers get the products that vendors make available? So I like to put together a logical chain that lets me think about what I'm trying to do in my system going on overall. So this is mini, if you will, accelerated systems engineering. In a systems engineering class, we'd spend a lot more time here. But you want to think about what you want your ultimate facility system to do. So we have customers who place orders for finished items that are produced by the staff out of bulk items, which had been produced by the staff out of raw items which have been purchased from vendors. So it's a two-phase manufacturing cycle, and it's important to know that everything goes through 2 phases. So we turn a raw item like ground coffee into a bulk item like a pot of coffee, so that we can then serve a cup of coffee as a finished item to the customers. There's very little going on in the store that would just be the vendor supplied product. I mean, if a customer buys a mug, maybe the mug hasn't changed since the vendor provided it. But for the most part, we want to think about a 2-tier production process. So starting our system analysis, we start with the facilities level of analysis. So we have our shops in the national chain, and they're largely made up of 3 kinds of things that I would note at this page. We have the production stations where work goes on. We have display areas where products are displayed for sale. And we have seating areas where customers can sit and consume their products. And then ultimately the shop has operating hours in which it operates. It's not a 24/7, 365 operation. We'll have to know when the store is operating at any given time. So those are the facilities we're talking about. The stations are fairly key to understanding the system and getting that 2-tier manufacturing process in place. So I've defined the types of stations as the display areas, the order areas, the preparation areas, the pickup areas, and the add-in areas. And both order and pickup areas will have drive-through and walk-in variations. In the enabling equipment area, all the stuff that's needed to make that happen, we have all the equipment in the shop going on. So we have preparation equipment, which I'll put on a different slide, and service equipment. So service equipment includes things like the display cases, the tables, the seats. The display cases are put together in display areas. And remember, we tend to group things arbitrarily at times in our enabling model because we want to apply work in our work system to that. So we're not going to assign people to clean up a display case. We're going to have them just clean up a display area. So we need to have arbitrary groupings at times that our system will be able to use to assign work. Tables and seats get put together in groups. You might have a table with 4 chairs around it. You might have a seat by itself with no tables. You might have a freestanding table over on the side people can stand at that doesn't have any chairs. So the seating groups are ultimately what matters. And again, we'll put those together in seating areas for the sake of assigning work. The service equipment really is the display cases, the tables, the seats, the restrooms, the waste bins, the storage areas, and the dumpsters associated with the shop. The preparation equipment is things like refrigerators and ovens. You might have convection, microwave, the mixers, the coffee machines, espresso, and the brewing machines. And there will obviously be a host of other pieces of equipment associated with the production in the coffee shop. I didn't spend a lot of time on this slide only because my procedures for doing things in a store are probably not going to get that detailed in 1 hour that I would want to differentiate a lot of equipment. So again, when you're taking a 1 hour quiz, you really have to stay focused on how do you get through the entire job and not bog down in details that won't be particularly relevant. But yes, there would be lots of other types of equipment in the coffee shop that I would eventually want to define. The staffing layer, as I move up conceptually in my system, is my employees. So I need to know who my employees are. And I need to know what shift hours they're going to work within the operating hours that I defined down at the facility level. So I've got people working in the shop for given hours. And in those hours, they're going to have station assignments where they work at various stations for different portions of the time. And or they have service assignments where they have jobs going around working with service equipment, emptying waste baskets and cleaning up tables and rearranging chairs and things of that nature. So those are the 2 types of things people do: defined tasks at the stations and service tasks around the shop. The materials and supplies really come down to the inventory of all the items that move through the store. So the combination of inventory of service equipment as well as inventory in the stations. I want to know where my inventory is. So how many Danish are in the display case, and how many cups of coffee are still in the coffee pot, things of that nature. So I'm going to be keeping inventory of all the different items that come through the shop. And that gets complicated. So remember, we tend to generalize stocks if creating a different stock for every type of thing would just clutter up the diagram. So we're keeping inventory of items, and then we want to keep track of what all those different items are. So you have a combination of vendor items, things we get from vendors, and things that we consider finished goods here in the shop. So operating items like soap and towels and mops and trash bags and things that I just need to help run the store, rags even. Supply items like napkins, cups, lids, and stirrers that I'm going to need. My raw material like the ground coffee. My bulk items like the pots of coffee. My ancillary items, which are a combination of both vendor items and also they're for sale, so they're also finished items, mugs and newspapers and bagged coffee and things that customers can buy while they're in the store. Then I've got my food items, my Danish, my rolls, my cakes, my bagels. So I've got my beverages, my coffee, my tea, my lattes and chais, and I've got convenience items at the add-in tray, so napkins and sugar and milk and stirrers and things of that nature. So there's lots of items throughout the shop. There's so many, in fact, you don't want to make the mistake of starting to create different stocks for every one of them. You're just going to manage items overall and then deal with attributes in your model to know what type it is and how much there is at any given time. The key to the item management is not so much what is the item, but where is it? Is it a box of napkins in the supply cabinet in the back? Is it a box of napkins in the storage cabinet underneath the convenience station? Or are we actually opening it up and running out? So keeping track of where things are is going to be important to the workflow and to the work assignments as I go through. On the production and distribution side, this is where I expect to see the implementation of my concept diagram. So I've got my vendors and my customers in this model. So you can do this model in either direction. I'll start in the top right and go with vendors. So vendors eventually supply vendor items And I acquire those in my shop by issuing purchase orders to my vendors. So I've got purchase orders overall and the items in it. So I'll put together maybe a purchase order to Cisco to order 10 different types of items that I purchase from them. So there's a hierarchy to that structure coming through, but ultimately all the vendor items need to be bought on purchase orders. From there, I'm going to have preparations defined. So how do I prepare things? How do I make a pot of coffee? So how do I turn raw material into bulk items? How do I cut up a cake I got from a vendor into slices and put into the display case? So how do I do the preparations of the things I've got in the store so I have the bulk items ready for sale? And then I've got recipes for how to turn bulk items into ultimately the finished items using the supply items and bulk items that I've got. So recipes involve getting things ready to be finished items. So I need bulk items like a pot of coffee, but I also need supply items like a cup and a lid and a stirrer, things of that nature. But I'm basically using my recipes to create my finished items. Once I have my finished items, then when customers walk in the store, they might walk in the store as groups of customers, but I ultimately serve individual customers who place orders which contain order items. So those order items goes back to my concept order that I'm thinking of. So you order 3 order items: a cup of coffee, a donut, and a newspaper. And those are 3 finished items the customer wants to walk out of the store with. And ultimately they have to pay for those items, so they're going to have to use an account. So they can use a credit account, a debit account, a check, a cash, whatever account they use. I would need to manage the financial side of customers paying for things. So this production distribution layer allows me to know all the things that will go on to implement the concept diagram I had earlier for the customer and vendor connection. My facility design, I can't go very deep during a 1-hour quiz, so I didn't really try, and I wouldn't expect you to. But basically the chain is made up of 1 or more shops. Each shop has, I said, 0 to many display areas, because maybe I'll have a shop that doesn't have a retail display area. It might be 0 to many seating areas. Maybe it's a walk-up kiosk kind of shop, and I'm not going to have seating areas in all of my shops, so I'll put that 0 to many. My workstations I defined earlier is going to be at least 5, but I could have multiple prep areas and multiple service areas and multiple order areas. So I made that 5 to many. There could be more. And then I've got to have my restrooms. So I've got 1 to many restrooms in a shop, and I didn't go any deeper on that, but the stocks handle some of the details within that model. The work design, I ended up coming up with procedures for all the flows and all those stock and flow diagrams. I ended up grouping them into 4 groups: the facility configuration, the facility operations, the staff scheduling, and then the customer supplier operations. So the main store is in that last piece, but the first 3 get me there in terms of getting implementation of all those stocks that I talked about in the earlier diagrams. I won't go through them in all the detail, but the facility configuration, that deals with the adding and subtracting of stops and stations and the display area, seating and operating hours that go into that original facility model. The staffing scheduling says that I have to be able to add and remove employees. I need to be able to schedule and close out their shifts. I need to assign them to their station roles. I need to assign them to their service roles. And then in terms of facility operations, I need to be able to add my service equipment, add seating groups, remove seating groups and rearrange, configure my display areas. I need to stock my display areas. I need to be able to clean up my seats and seating areas and reset them if customers move the chairs around. I need to be able to clean and restock my restrooms and empty and straighten my waste bins and dumpsters. And then I need to constantly check my stored inventories at all those locations and then restock the downstream storage if things need to be moved out. So if I'm cleaning up and restocking, say, a convenience area of napkins and stirrers, if I'm out of napkins, I'm going to get more from the box that stores in the cabinet underneath them. But periodically, I'm going to notice that the box is getting low. So I'm going to go back in the back room and I'm going to get a new box and bring it out. So those are the procedures. Will lay all of that out for restocking things as they go through. And then finally, I've got my customer supplier operations. So adding and selecting vendors, issuing my purchase orders, getting things received, adding new preparations and discontinuing them, adding new recipes and discontinuing those, adding customers, removing customers, letting them order things, adding items to orders, closing out orders, and creating my customer group. So I've got stock and flow in the system for everything that goes on in the system overall. I've implemented the stocks and flows for all of the conceptual portions of my system. as well as for the component mechanistic and organismic aspects of the system. And for a 1 hour quiz, this is a fairly complete picture of what the coffee shop has to be able to do. There's lots of detail missing. It'd be easier to define a full coffee shop in 3 hours than in 1 hour. But from a conceptualization side, the coffee shop is the kind of system that typically you can do a pretty good system scoping in 4 hours or less in the workplace. So if you put together a small team, if you really worked for a coffee shop chain and had to do this, go in a conference room for 3 or 4 hours, you're going to come out with a pretty complete model.